โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ And blessings to you all. One of the obstacles to the practice that Ajahn Chah used to talk about quite a lot is our attachment to wrong views, wrong beliefs, and just even to rituals and different kinds of practices and external things such as astrology or amulets and statues and talisman and all kinds of verses and potions and all kinds of things that you might call the externals of spiritual practice. And many Buddhists, as we know, will have a regular practice of meditation, listening to the Dhamma, and maybe keeping precepts, maybe not. But they'll also have a lot of time for these externals and for these even wrong beliefs or wrong attachments to things that ultimately can be a cause for more delusion, more confusion in life. I was just thinking the first time I went to give a talk or teaching in Singapore, it was almost 30 years ago. It was around this time, it was the beginning of May, in the mid-90s. And I went to teach in a bank in Singapore, one of the banks, and at the end of the talk, people were coming up. These were all people who worked in the bank, all the staff, and they came up and they were all asking for amulets, holy water, blessed string, whatever I had, which I didn't have much, I seem to remember. I was a very junior monk, and junior monks often don't have much with them to give away to lay people. But they were all asking, they listened to the talk very politely, but then they wanted the blessed string or the blessed water. Then I went to visit a hospital and a few people in hospital, and they all wanted whatever I could give them in terms of blessed string, blessed water, or blessings. And then in the evening I went to the temple, Wat Ananda, to give a talk for Wesak, and it was absolutely packed. There was probably thousands of people, certainly many hundreds. And it was very hot. And everyone was packed into the small little hall with very little windows, no aircon, and everyone was lighting joss sticks. So the atmosphere was really unpleasant, full of smoke. It was hot, humid. And I gave a talk, and as I was giving the talk, I got really hot and sweaty, so my robe got really wet with sweat. I think it was the wettest it's ever been just through sweat. It literally seemed like I'd washed my robe and put it on wet. But it was my own sweat from the atmosphere and the temperature. When I finished giving the talk, I was pretty exhausted because I'd been teaching all day and meeting people all day. And at the very end, a man walked up with a bottle of Sprite. I don't know if they still have bottled Sprite, but they did in those days. And he gave it to me, and I thought, that's just what I need. I'm completely exhausted, drained. I've sweated all the moisture out of my body, so a nice cold Sprite would be good. And I received it, and then he said, can you bless it for me? He wanted a blessed Sprite. So out of compassion I blessed it for him and gave it back. I didn't get my Sprite, and he got his blessed water. But this is the nature of humans. We're always looking for external support for our life, for our practice. Even in Buddhism, we want objects empowered by the monks, or we want a chant, or we want some holy water, whatever. And Ajahn Chah used to be, sometimes he'd make fun of it, sometimes he'd be very critical of it. And he'd just point out, people just want these things and to cling to these externals, and they don't want to look at their own mind, their own heart. And of course, meditation and cultivating mindfulness, as we were just doing earlier, it's not easy. It's challenging because our mind is not well trained. It's not yet at peace. When we bring up mindfulness, it's hard work to keep mindfulness, keep the mind on an object, to be aware of yourself. It's hard work because the mind is not used to it. It's more used to going out through the senses. Seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling. And so naturally we look for refuges and supports and attach to external things as our source of happiness. Whether it's money, or our house, our car, our family, or even if you're practicing Buddhism, then you'll look for external things like holy water and blessings and various rituals or astrological readings or various superstitions, whatever. We'll always be going out looking for things to cling to. In Thailand it was termite mounds. That's one of the first things I thought of when I came to Australia, because we have termite mounds here. I wasn't expecting that. Somehow I assumed Australia wouldn't have termite mounds, but it does. And in Thailand they'll wrap ribbon around termite mounds and light joss sticks and pray to the termite mound or the guardian of the termite mound to get what they want. Or they'll have a spirit house in front of their house, or even in front of their factory, or even in front of their big government building or office block or whatever. It's just this human need for refuges and supports, but we tend to always be looking outside of ourselves for these things. And we're often being disappointed because these things are not totally reliable. Just recently, somebody bought a car to the monastery for me to bless. They want the monk to sit in the car, chant a bit, spread metta, bless the car, which I usually do if I'm free, out of kindness, but try not to encourage them to think too much, get too attached to it. And I remind people, it's how you drive is more important than whether you've been blessed or not. But this person, I said, hold on, didn't you come just a month ago? And they said, yeah, you blessed my first car and it's already been written off. I had an accident. Now this is my new car. So only 1 month of blessing and already on a new car. I'm not sure if that's a sign that my whatever blessings I do give are not very good quality. But they said there that the cause of the accident that rode off their car was not their fault at all. That's the disclaimer. They were just sitting in a queue at the lights and somebody smashed into them. So I said, well, the blessing was to stop you getting injured, because they weren't injured, luckily. But I couldn't help the car. That was the old karma. So of course it's nice to get blessings, it boosts us, makes us feel good, feel a bit more confident. But the best blessing is to come looking into your own heart. Get to know your own mind. That's where real merit, this term we use, merit, that's where real merit arises, or real good karma arises. From training in right view and right thought. These are the essentials, the beginning of the practice and the whole of the practice. Because, transcendental right view is insight into the Four Noble Truths, abandoning the mental defilements, purifying your mind of the mental defilements, greed, anger and delusion, which are the cause of suffering. But it begins with right view just from hearing the Dhamma and thinking about the Dhamma. So to do that, you have to bring your attention inwards. And this is why bhavana, or meditation, is the highest kind of good karma, the highest kind of merit. Because you can really change your mind through developing the path on the inside, rather than always looking on the outside to cling on to amulets and string and holy water and rituals and all the other things that we cling to. So Ajahn Chah was always getting people to just come back and look at their minds, get to know their own minds in their daily life, whether you're meditating or just whether you're doing anything else. Know your mind from moment to moment. And know your mind whether you're engaging in what we call right thought, samma sankappa, or wrong thought, miccha sankappa. Samma sankappa is described by the Buddha as the thought of renunciation, letting go, nekkhamma sankappa, as opposed to thoughts rooted in greed and attachment. Thoughts rooted in non-ill will, abhayabhada, as opposed to thoughts rooted in ill will. So thoughts of kindness, metta, rather than thoughts of anger. And then developing thoughts of compassion, empathy, understanding, sensitivity to others, as opposed to cruelty, hatred. There's a very simple reflection that you can bring up at any time through your day, or in the process of your meditation, or in the course of the day. It's just to bring your attention back to your mind and say, am I developing right thought or wrong thought at this moment? Because wrong thought, greed, anger, hatred, is leading to suffering. Already a thought of anger or greed brings with it an unpleasant feeling. It agitates the mind. Because often people, they say, well, I can't see my thoughts and I don't really know that they're making bad karma, I can't see it. But if you become mindful, you'll notice a thought of greed already is bringing you unhappiness in its nature. It agitates the mind. Because greed, attachment through looking for pleasure through your senses, is how it comes up. It agitates the mind because at that moment you feel like you need something to be happy, something else, something you haven't got. Even a blessing, even this what we call spiritual materialism, spiritual greed, and it may be just wanting a blessing or wanting some special teaching or some special state from your meditation. But the more normal kind of greed, obviously, is just wanting pleasure through your seeing, hearing, tasting, touching. It already is agitating the mind. You're not content, you're not satisfied whenever a moment, a thought of greed takes over the mind. So if you can see that, then the correct course of action is bring up a thought of letting go, renunciation. But we don't like to do that. Why? Because we haven't done enough before, probably. We're still doubting that it's really a way to happiness. Can letting go really bring us happiness? Getting seems to be happiness. When you get what you want, that brings you happiness, and it will bring you some pleasure usually. But that pleasure is often very fleeting and often bound up with pain, isn't it? And it agitates the mind. Even in the very anticipation of what you're hoping to get, agitates your mind. You're not at ease. Ill will is the same. Even when we feel wronged and we feel that we should be angry because something that shouldn't have happened has happened, our bad luck, misfortune, the bad behavior of someone else, hearing about other people doing things that are wrong, bad, we get angry and we feel we should be angry when we're lost in anger. But if you establish the mindfulness, you realize straight away that anger is accompanied by painful feeling, stress. And hatred the same. Hatred is really just the solidifying of anger, the actual wanting to get back at someone, wanting to get them through thought, through speech, through action. It's an unpleasant way to be. It could be just mild irritation, or it could be fierce hatred. Doesn't matter, it's still accompanied by an unpleasant feeling. It's already making you unhappy the very moment the thought takes over your mind. So this is a huge part of our practice, is training ourselves just to know what we're thinking and then to recognize the difference between right thought, samma sankappa, and wrong thought. The right and the wrongness of it isn't determined by some higher authority. The Buddha was simply pointing out the truth as he saw it, but he wasn't saying, I'm in control or making this up. It's just the way it is. But the only way you can see the way it is by learning from your own experience. Turning your attention inwards to recognize the difference between right thought and wrong thought, or we say skillful, wholesome thought and unskillful, unwholesome thought. And then acting accordingly, making the effort to abandon the wrong thought and bring up and cultivate the right thought. So if you do get a blessing, you get the holy water, you get the car blessed, you get the blessed chanted over you, and that means it's still good, and you probably get some good feeling from it. That really is not good enough. This is not what the Buddha was teaching, and it's also can be very deluding, because once you get the blessing, then you often don't really look more deeply into your mind and recognize the kind of thoughts you're developing in your daily life. You say, I've been blessed, and then off you go, and maybe you're full of greed or anger, and you don't see it because you're not looking now. You've been blessed, and that's how attachment can work, especially even in spiritual life, Buddhist practice. You can blind yourself to the truth by attaching to a blessing or a ritual or an amulet. Amulets are another thing, aren't they? People love to have amulets. They go to monks and say, have you got any good amulets? Especially in Thailand and Singapore, Malaysia, people love amulets. They trade them, they seek them out. And of course, it's a fairly harmless thing, so it's not like it's some evil thing to have an amulet. But as Buddhists, we're practicing to find the Buddha inside as opposed to the external Buddha, the historical Buddha or the Buddha in a statue or in an amulet. It's not that the external Buddha is wrong. It's simply you have to see it's only a starting point for finding the internal Buddha, the immaterial Buddha, the quality of knowing, understanding the truth. And when I was a young monk, we'd go into the forest looking for good situations to test our meditations. So going to charnel grounds that were reputed to be haunted, going into forests that still had wild animals like bears and tigers and elephants. And the first rule of going in the forest was give up your amulets. Because you go into a forest with an amulet, you're already thinking, oh, I've got my amulet, I'll be fine. You're off your guard, aren't you? You become complacent. So you give away your amulet or you put it in a safe place and leave it behind. So you've just got your practice of mindfulness and wisdom, sila, samadhi, panya. This is what we've got to learn. We've got to learn how to find the inner path and the path to the Buddha inside, rather than relying on all these externals. It doesn't mean to say you have to give away all your externals or give them up, physically give them up, but you have to see through them, that they're not the real refuge in the practice. You know, your house that you live in is a useful place to protect you from the elements, keep you safe when you sleep at night and so on. But it's not your real refuge. You know, the real refuge is the inner home of the mind that is trained with mindfulness and wisdom, understanding. That's what Ajahn Chah was teaching people to develop over and over again. There's one way of looking at your life, is what do you take as your refuge? Are you taking refuge in the things around you, your physical security and your wealth and your good reputation and all this knowledge of the world that you have and your credit cards and your ability to make money and do things, which is all good on one level, but it's also very unreliable, isn't it? Uncertain. And especially as you get older and closer to your death, you realize it's not the ultimate happiness, is it? Because you can't take it with you. Or are you looking for the inner refuge, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha on the inside, which is more valuable, more lasting, more reliable, never lets you get down. The practice of mindfulness and insight never lets you down when it's done properly. When you develop right thoughts of letting go, kindness, compassion, you're never let down by that because they're wholesome in their nature. They don't agitate the mind. They don't make you feel stressed. Just a thought of kindness makes the mind brighter and happier in that very moment. Bringing up mindfulness, when you make the effort to be mindful of the breath, or mindful of what you're saying, practicing right speech, mindful of walking, when you're walking meditation or even just walking here and there mindfully, when you bring up mindfulness, you're not disappointed, because in its nature, the qualities of mindfulness are that it's non-stressful. If you're truly mindful in that moment, you're not stressed. They can't exist in the same mind together. Feelings of pain, stress, worry, anxiety, all the things that we describe as stress cannot exist together with mindfulness. One can replace the other, so sometimes we lose our mindfulness and stressful thoughts will come in. Greed, anger, hatred will come in. But if you establish mindfulness, they can't come in. So learning to recognize right thought and recognize wrong thought, micca sankappa, and the difference is a vital development in our practice, and it's a skill that we're developing every day. Know what you're thinking. Of course, we also have this problem, we get worried or upset by what we're thinking, because a lot of it isn't so skillful and it comes up and then we judge it and we get upset that we're having all these negative thoughts and we make more suffering out of it. But the whole point of developing mindful awareness and wise reflection is you're looking in a detached way at what you're thinking and accepting if you do have a negative thought, some anger, some greed, some worry. You understand this is just the product of past unskillful thinking, a lack of mindfulness and understanding in the past has led this thought to arise now in the present. So you accept that fact, but now you're establishing mindfulness and reflecting, oh, this is the way to suffering, this is to be let go of. And bringing up the opposite, the mindfulness, the kindness, the letting go of attachments. But to do this, we have to invest time in developing awareness and internalizing this awareness. If you just put all your hopes on the externals, the blessings, the rituals, the material wealth, and all of that, it's just too unreliable, because you can still be very wealthy and still be very unhappy inside because you're full of greed and anger. Or you can get blessed by the monk, but then you go away and you still lose your temper. It's not a guarantee. More of a guarantee is cultivating the qualities of the path. Virtue, mindfulness, virtuous behavior, mindfulness, and insight. Just reflecting on the changing, impermanent nature of your thoughts is a huge success in the practice. Seeing a thought arise and pass away, some thought of desire, greed that you want, something that you think, I need this to be happy, but then realizing it's just a thought, watching it pass away, that kind of insight into impermanence is our real refuge. As having seen the impermanent nature of a thought, an emotion, a feeling that comes up, that's where liberation comes from, isn't it? By seeing, it arises, it passes away. You don't have to judge yourself, beat yourself up for having too many thoughts or the wrong kind of thoughts, but just to know them as something that arises and ceases is enough. And you can free yourself from their influence. And every thought, every feeling, every memory has this quality in common. It's impermanent, it arises and it ceases. So the Buddha gave us this framework, looking at, we call the 5 khandhas, the 5 groups of experience that make up a human being: body, feelings, memories, thoughts, and sense consciousness. Whatever aspect of the 5 khandhas you look at, they're impermanent, they're changing. Anytime you bring up mindfulness and reflect, see impermanence in your physical or mental activity, you're liberating your mind from delusion, from wrong beliefs, wrong thoughts, from the causes of suffering. And the more we do it, the better we'll get at it. It doesn't mean to say we can't have blessings. Of course, it's nice to have a blessing, and it can be a skillful means. It's not that all blessings are wrong and just bringing you superstitious belief in things and wrong views. It doesn't have to be like that. But you're going beyond the blessing, the external blessing, and developing the inner qualities that really sustain happiness in a mind that's free from suffering. Luang Por Anand talks about when he was a young monk living with Ajahn Chah, there was a group of lay people they bought. They were always coming to Ajahn Chah asking if he would make some amulets that they could give out. And he'd never do it because he didn't want to encourage people to just attach to the externals. He'd say, come and meditate, listen to the Dhamma and meditate, it'll be more useful. Nevertheless, people were very stubborn in their attachment to these things, so there was one group that kept coming, and eventually they didn't wait for him to give permission, because in the past he'd refused permission. So they just went off and made the amulets, and then they came to Ajahn Chah and said, we've made them, will you bless them, will you give them away for us, and make us so happy. And probably out of compassion, he just saw it does make people happy to make amulets and receive amulets, so he did give a few away, and all the monks were sitting there, and they're seeing Ajahn Chah give away the amulets, and they're all thinking, it'd be nice if I had one of those. And Ajahn, because even the monks get attached to amulets, so Ajahn Anand was sitting there, the young Ajahn Anand sitting there, be nice to have if Ajahn Chah gave me one. And as he was thinking that, Ajahn Chah just turned around and looked straight at him. So we say, possibly knowing what he was thinking, reading his mind, who knows. And he just said, oh, I've given you much better things than this, as he was holding an amulet, giving it away to a lay person. And this is the way Ajahn Chah taught. He was encouraging people not to attach to the externals, but to go to the real heart of the practice, develop the mindfulness, develop the insight, because that's better than anything else. It's more reliable than anything else. A lot of people have been talking about how they've practiced over the last few years in the times of COVID, and some people have caught COVID or been sick, and how easy it is just to give up the practice when you're sick, because you've got a really good excuse not to do anything. You just lie there on your bed or with your coughs and your colds or whatever the other symptoms you've got. And the easiest thing is to say, oh, I'm ill, I can't chant, I can't meditate, I can't listen to Dhamma, I can't concentrate. Well, these are the very times we should be developing these qualities. If you've caught COVID, the amulet can't help you anymore because you've got COVID or whatever illness it is. Now is the time to rely on the mindfulness. That can really help you. You're practicing some mindfulness when you're ill. Of course, we don't want to be ill, but better to be able to keep your mind in a wholesome, skillful state when you're ill. And how do we do that? We have to train our mind. A well-trained mind brings happiness. Even when you're ill, you can find happiness within by establishing mindfulness and knowing, oh, yeah, at the moment I'm ill, I feel weak, I've got pain, I'm hard to concentrate, I'm fuzzy-headed maybe. If you have to take medication, it doesn't help. But I can be mindful of this. I can know what it feels like. I can know what's coming up in my mind. Maybe you have all kinds of crazy thoughts when you're ill. You have all kinds of imagination. Sometimes people get so ill they get hallucinations, dreams and hallucinations. It's all possible. But you can still establish mindfulness and work just to know what is going on. Not to get lost in it. Not to get lost in the longing to get better. And I don't mean to say I don't want you to get better, but what I mean is that desire to get better becomes another form of attachment or greed, doesn't it? You're not happy with lying in bed or being ill or feeling weak, and you're only thinking, when am I going to get over this? When am I going to get back to normal? That makes your suffering worse, doesn't it? It's a form of greed. When you're ill, you've lost all your pleasure, you can't taste food, you can't enjoy the things you normally enjoy, you're feeling some pain, so you're just looking for pleasure. And so you associate getting better with pleasure, so you say, when am I going to get better so I can have my pleasure again? And that's the suffering of pleasure, isn't it? Pleasure seeking, pleasure attachment. But if you can be mindful, you say, okay, it's like this, I'm weak, can't concentrate, can't do anything, my nose is blocked, I'm coughing, I've got a sore throat, I've got fever, I've got whatever the symptoms. Just to know them, and already establishing mindfulness and knowing those symptoms in the present moment changes your whole attitude to them. Some of those negative thoughts, some of the ill will, aversion that may have been arising starts to subside when you're mindful. Because when you're mindful even of unpleasant feelings, unpleasant symptoms associated with some illness, at that moment greed and anger cannot subsist, live in your mind. They cannot be there in your mind. If you can string together a few moments of mindfulness, you may actually realize, oh, I can let go of all this negative thinking at this time, by focusing the mind on something that helps you to be mindful. Could be the breath, could be recollecting the Buddha, could be the thought of metta, loving kindness. I knew one man who was dying of cancer, and he spent the first few months of his cancer just being angry with everyone, hating everyone, hating the world, hating everyone, because no one could cure him of his cancer. So he just went to aversion. Miccha sankappa, wrong thinking. But then he had a sort of a insight one day. He said, I'm just miserable here. But the real misery is not so much the condition. He was a bit weaker than normal. He couldn't do everything, physically everything that he wanted to do, but he could still move around and he could still eat and talk and see. And he was more limited than normal, but he could still do many things. But he said the real suffering is just this bad mood, foul mood. He's blaming everyone, even his family who are looking after him. He's being really grouchy with them, complaining, criticizing them, criticizing the doctors and nurses, particularly when they sent him back from the hospital, then they couldn't help him anymore. So that really made him mad, angry. But then one day he realized all this anger is just my own wrong thinking. No one else is doing it to me. It's my thought. Because he was sitting in a room all day long, so he couldn't blame anyone anymore. He just realized it's just my own thought. It's almost like being on a meditation retreat. You put someone in a quiet place, and often the first thing they feel is anger and ill will. All the stuff, the bad stuff that's happened in their life comes up, doesn't it? Lots of memories, disappointments, frustrations. Maybe you have a lot of attachment come up as well, things you want that you haven't got. But when you're in a quiet place on your own, you start to see it's really your own problem. You can't blame this on anyone else. It's your own wrong thinking. So what's the way out? Well, it's to know it, recognize it, and then start letting go. To do that, you need to be mindful. So this man, he started to practice mindfulness. And he realized by becoming more aware of his own mind, if I abandon the negative thoughts and bring up thoughts of kindness, appreciation, gratitude, everything changes. Your whole mental state changes. And even though his physical illness was continuing, he couldn't get rid of that, mentally his whole world changed. What is the world? It's your mind, isn't it? How you view the world starts in your mind. If you can bring up right thinking, so non-attachment, non-anger, non-hatred, your world improves dramatically, immediately. To do that, to facilitate that, you need to bring up the mindfulness and then reflect. What am I thinking? Is it conducive to happiness, or is it making me miserable and unhappy? And recognizing that you really have the power for your own happiness and suffering in yourself. No one else can do that for you. Even the monk blesses you. It's only a little bit of good feeling. It's better than nothing, but it's not the real way to happiness yet. You have to do it for yourself. Recognize where you're going wrong in your thinking and abandon the wrong thinking. So this man did it very well. And he ended up being a real blessing to everyone around him. From being a real cranky, horrible person to be around, he became very pleasant. And everyone was very happy to visit him. And he suddenly got more visits from friends and relatives, and everyone was much, much more relaxed around him because he became more relaxed, because he changed the way he was thinking about his situation. This is what this is the miracle of the Dhamma. This is finding the Buddha on the inside of your heart, rather than just relying on externals and then getting disappointed when they fail. I can't stop bad things happening. Bad things do happen in the world. The world is an imperfect place. Sometimes we get ill. Well, you can't blame that on the Buddha or the monks. The monk's blessing didn't work, or the car accident, or the monk's blessing didn't work. We also have to look back at our role in this, what's going on in our mind, what am I thinking? And that's where you can really free yourself from suffering. So establish right view, recognize suffering comes from wrong thinking, greed, anger, hatred, worry, fear, all that kind of stuff. And start letting it go, start shedding it. It's like a burden, isn't it? You have to carry these angry thoughts, the worries, with you. So it's like baggage, it just weighs you down after a while. But it's mental baggage. It's very easy to start recognizing this point and start letting it go, putting it down. The practice of letting go is something you do in the present moment, isn't it? It's another thing, particularly Buddhists get caught into this problem. They say, the Buddha taught me to let go of my greed, anger, delusions and attachments. So I'm going to practice until I can let go, and it's, letting go is somewhere far off in the future. When I can let go, then everything will be fine. When I finish with all my burdens, my work, my family, my this, my that, then I'll start practicing, then I'll let go, and then everything will be fine. But, letting go is something you practice in the present moment, right here, right now, depending on what's coming up in your mind. Obviously, there's times when you don't need to let go. When you're mindful, you don't need to let go. You just keep up the mindfulness, or you have a wholesome thought of kindness, or reflecting on impermanence, well, you carry on with that. When I say letting go, I mean the greed, the anger, the fear, the worry. Those are the things you let go of. And that's to be done in the present moment, and not at some distant point. Or, don't invest all your happiness in the future, as in, when I've let go of everything, then I'll be happy, in a few years' time or next life. Buddhists do this all the time, don't they? I'll do this dana now so that I can have a good rebirth, have a nice heavenly rebirth, and then everything will be fine next life. But the greed, the anger, the worry is arising right here, right now, not next life. It's to be let go of right here, right now, not next life. If you haven't let go of it this life, then it's only going to follow you into next life, like a kind of ghost. No one likes ghosts, no one likes being haunted, but how are you being haunted by your own greed, anger and delusion? It goes with you, doesn't it? It's not to be let go of at some distant point in the future, it's to be let go of here, now, right now. It's another thing Ajahn Chah pointed out. People come to the temple and they make merit, and they're all sitting there thinking, I make merit so that I can be happy, so that I can get what I want, so that I can get a good rebirth or become successful, or sometimes we're doing it to be prominent in society so everyone knows we're a good person. We're full of greed at a time when we should be letting go. So we don't get the results we want. We do the merit making, we offer the things, we do something that could be quite good if done with the right attitude, the right awareness, with mindfulness, with that understanding this is a time to let go of attachment. But we fail to do that because we already come into the merit making with the idea this is going to get me something. Or what am I going to get from this? If you did a survey of people as they're making offerings to Sangha, if you could pull out their thinking mind at that point, you'd probably find 90% are sitting there, I'm going to do this offering now and I want this in return. It's a bargain, isn't it? It's this kind of spiritual bargain or negotiation. I'm going to offer this, but I've got to get my praise. We want recognition. So people sometimes get upset if the monk doesn't seem to appreciate the sacrifice, or their friends don't notice, or just generally people aren't giving them the recognition for all this good they've done. They get disappointed. Maybe they stop, don't do it anymore. Or they want their heavenly rebirth, or they want some kind of praise from others. They want others to treat them well, so when they've done all this good, maybe it's with the monks, or maybe just helping people in society, or helping a relative or friend, done all this help, now I want my returns, my just returns, and I want them to treat me nicely and come and help me when I have trouble, because life is uncertain, isn't it? So we help people, and then we expect when we're in trouble, we get ill or we lose our job, then we want them to come back and help us. we don't see. We made this bargain at the time we were helping. We actually had this desire for something in return. And that's not what Ajahn Chah taught, it's not what the Buddha taught. He said when you practice any kind of dana, generosity, kindness, make merit, you're practicing letting go. It's not seeking anything in return. If people don't recognize the good you do, it doesn't matter. Well, that's their problem, that's their issue, not your issue. If you help someone and they're not grateful and appreciative, and later on they ignore you when you're in trouble, that's their problem, that's their loss. But we can't expect things in return just because we've done something good. We can't expect it to go into the newspapers or on Facebook or whatever, or get people coming back to tell us how good we are. They're two different things, aren't they? Right thought is letting go of greed, letting go of anger, letting go of hatred, bringing up mindfulness, bringing up kindness, compassion, bringing up letting go of all our attachments. That's the real Buddha within, that's the real way of practice. So many good people have their goodness diminished, and even turn away from doing good because of they don't see this. This is the delusion, isn't it? The craving for some kind of reward or return or something, and then they don't get it, and then they misunderstand and blame themselves, blame the Buddha, blame somebody, and maybe undermine their own practice and their desire to do more good because they're not getting what they want in return. But the reason they're not getting what they want is because they had so much wanting in the first place. They weren't practicing with the right thought, the right attitude. When you practice dana, helping somebody, being kind to somebody, that's good enough in itself. Just let go of your attachment in that moment. Your selfishness, your stinginess, your whatever, you just let it go. And then move on and do it again, and it gets easier. The more you do it, it gets easier, but you don't need to seek anything in return. Next life is far too far away. Those ones who are already reserved their place with Maitreya Buddha, I'm going to die and going to be reborn with Maitreya Buddha, the next Buddha, get enlightened then. We think we're being smart. We think, I'll get ahead of the pack, get ahead of the herd, and I'll get my place, book my place with Maitreya Buddha. But it doesn't work like that, because we've got so much attachment and clinging to that view. We're not seeing what we're doing in the present moment. We may be doing all kinds of unskillful things. Unskillful thinking, stress, suffering, and we're not seeing it. We're not recognizing it because the mind is stuck on its goal way over there in the future, but it's not seeing what's going on in the present moment. Something that people often criticize Buddhism because they misunderstand. They say Buddhism, teaches you to be passive, not have any goals or ambitions because they're just desire. So then, how do you function in the world? But the Buddha just pointed out that if you attach with greed to a goal, it will cause you suffering. He didn't say don't have any goals. Everyone has to have a goal, because our goal is happiness, freedom from suffering, nibbana, the unconditioned. But if you attach to your goal with greed, you'll suffer. So whether it's just offering dana, practicing charity, generosity, if you're attaching with greed to that, to some kind of outcome that you're expecting, helping other people, you'll suffer. You keep precepts, you practice virtuous conduct, following the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts. You're doing that and that's good, you're disciplined, but if then you start attaching expecting some reward, expecting praise or recognition, or thinking you're better than other people, you're going to suffer. It's another form of greed. And when you attach, say you keep the 5 precepts, and this is another Buddhist problem, isn't it? You keep the 5 precepts, and then when someone else doesn't, you look down on them. You think you're better than them, and then you experience suffering again. How many Buddhists criticize others for not being as good as them? And they don't see the conceit, the arrogance hiding wrong thinking. We practice the precepts to train the mind, cleanse the mind particularly from aversion and hatred, and to practice contentment and give up the greed that would lead us to, say, steal or commit acts of sexual misconduct. We're practicing the precepts to purify our behavior and remove greed, anger and delusion from the mind, not to get anything and not to be better than anybody. It's grasping at it in the wrong way. You might call it silapata paramasa, wrong grasping at the practices that we do. Even Buddhists can do that. Bhavana, meditation, the same. I meditate for something, to get something, to get my goal. My goal may be a blissful state, or to know have special experiences and know amazing things, or to know more than the next guy, or to be more successful than the next person. If I meditate, then I'll be good at my business, good at my job, get my promotion, get the girl, get the boy, get on in life, get famous as a good meditator. It can slip in all the time. Still, it's wrong thinking, it's greed, it's not letting go. Really, we just have to come back to focusing on bringing up mindfulness in the present moment and letting go. But not to get hooked onto the goal of it, wanting the special experience, wanting to see things. When I was a young monk, they'd always ask you this, you go into the forest and you're struggling with your fears of tigers and bears and snakes, and people just come up to you in the forest. They don't say, "Oh, how are you coping with your fear and your worry of tigers?" They say, "Oh, what have you seen in your meditation? Have you seen anything?" They want lottery numbers, or they want some astrological reading. They want to know their fortune. Nobody comes into the forest and say, "How are you doing? Is it tough here? Are you getting wet at night? Are you getting enough food?" Most people don't say that. They just want something. They say, "Luang Por, did you see anything in your dreams last night or in your visions?" And you say, "Oh yeah, I saw my breath arising and passing away." And then they walk away disappointed because they didn't get anything. So right thought is letting go of greed, letting go of anger, letting go of hatred. Wrong thought is promoting and supporting and holding on to greed, anger and hatred. This is the basics of practice, the nuts and bolts of Buddhist practice. What the Buddhists do, they practice developing right thought. People often ask, what the Buddhists believe in. Well, we believe that the human mind can free itself from wrong thought. So then we practice that. To practice it, you've got to believe it can be done. And we've got the Buddha, we've got Ajahn Chah, we've got all the teachers who have proven that it can be done, and we trust in that. We still don't know absolutely for ourselves, but we trust that. Maybe you've met a teacher, you've heard what they had to say, you've seen how they live, it seems correct, but now you have to practice for yourself. But the reason you practice is because you believe that it can be done. You can abandon wrong thinking and you can cultivate right thinking. Otherwise you wouldn't bother, would you? You just give up and think, "Oh, it's all hopeless and too difficult." Unfortunately, that's another delusion we get caught into sometimes. So sometimes we turn away from the practice And that's why Ajahn Chah said, be very patient. When the going gets tough, just be patient. Yes, sure, your mind may be full of crazy thoughts, stupid thoughts, very low base thoughts, sometimes very superior thoughts, but they're all just thoughts. And be patient with them. Little by little, every moment of mindfulness is a little bit of merit, a little bit of good karma, and these will join together, and then some understanding will develop, and you'll see thoughts just arise, pass away. That's all they are. They're not me, they're not a self, they're just thoughts. And thoughts just do their thing. The reason we suffer is because we attach to them. You have an angry thought, and then you say, I'm angry, and you attach, and then you suffer. So have enough mindfulness not to attach, to see it's just a thought, and then you can let it go, and then you're happier. And just keep doing it until the job is done, however long it takes. It doesn't matter if it's this life, next life. Don't worry too much about that. Just keep coming back to the mindfulness and the letting go. So that's the talk for tonight, and I wish you all well in your practice.